The air in the arena wasn't just loud, it was heavy, charged with a frequency that felt different from the usual hum of an international exhibition game. This wasn't the polite, rhythmic clapping of a neutral crowd appreciating a well-executed play. This was a sound with texture, a low, restless rumble of anticipation undercut by sharp, anxious bursts of conversation. It was the sound of something building, something on the verge of breaking. Even before the opening tip, before a single dribble echoed on the hardwood, one name was already a palpable presence in the building, chanted on social media, debated in the stands, and whispered in the press rows: Caitlin Clark. For weeks, months even, the basketball world had been gripped by a single simmering question. It was a question debated by analysts on national television, their arguments growing more heated with each passing segment. It was a topic dissected by former players on podcasts, their insider perspectives lending weight to the controversy. It was a firestorm raging across social media, with fans creating hashtags, posting highlight reels, and demanding answers. The question was simple, yet its implications were seismic. Why wasn't Caitlin Clark starting? This was, after all, the most talked-about player in basketball. She was the player who had single-handedly shattered viewership records in college, transforming a generational rivalry into a must-see television event. She was the player drawing record crowds to WNBA arenas, filling seats that had remained empty for years, creating a Caitlin effect that economists and league executives were scrambling to quantify. She was a cultural phenomenon, a name known not just to sports fans but to anyone who had been near a screen for the past 6 months. And yet, as the senior team exhibition games began, she was being brought off the bench. She was being given minutes, yes, but not the reins, not the full control of the offense. The strategy, according to the coaching staff, was about integration, about managing a roster of stars, about earning your stripes. But to a growing chorus of observers, it looked like something else entirely. Because inside the hushed corridors of team hotels and the quiet, wood-paneled offices of league executives, a completely different conversation was taking place. It wasn't about basketball strategy. It was a conversation about power. It was nervous, political, and fraught with the unspoken anxieties of an entire ecosystem on the brink of change. When a generational player arrives, a player who doesn't just fit into the sport but fundamentally alters its geometry, everything shifts. The ratings change, the money flows in new directions, and the spotlight, once shared among a constellation of stars, begins to gravitate toward a single, blinding sun. And for those who were accustomed to controlling that spotlight, who had spent years cultivating their own brands and influence within the existing order, this gravitational shift creates a feeling they haven't experienced in a long time: pressure. It's the pressure of obsolescence, the fear of being eclipsed, the quiet dread of a future where the old rules no longer apply. Caitlin Clark wasn't just another rookie. She was a force of nature, a player who bent defenses with her eyes, stretched the court to 30 feet, and made the impossible look routine. She possessed a once-in-a-generation blend of vision, range, and unshakable confidence. When someone like that enters a league, the entire solar system starts to reorient itself around her. Some people, like the fans packing the arenas, loved it. Some people, perhaps those with a vested interest in the status quo, feared it. But on this particular night, under the weight of public opinion and the undeniable logic of her talent, something finally gave. The lever was pulled. Caitlin Clark's name was called among the starters. The pre-game commentary had been building to a crescendo. The analysts on the broadcast, no longer able to contain their frustration, had laid the argument bare for millions to hear. Their words captured the exasperation of an entire fan base. "I just truly don't get it," one commentator had said, shaking his head. "I think it's quite disrespectful to her. You're starting Paige Buchers for one of the games. Angel Reese got a starting nod. Kiki Iriafen got a starting nod. And these are all younger players who are making their senior debuts just like Caitlin Clark. And then you have Caitlin Clark, who is clearly the biggest superstar in women's basketball, just not starting. I just don't understand it. I'll keep it at that." He had paused, letting the weight of the statement settle. It didn't change the outcome of the previous games, he conceded. She still played significant minutes and performed well. But the point was larger than the box score. It was about symbolism. It was about acknowledging the shift that had already occurred in the minds of the public. It was about stopping the awkward dance of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole and simply admitting that the game now revolved around her. For the first time, the public address announcer's voice, usually a source of routine information, carried the weight of a historical proclamation. As the starting lineup was introduced, a wave of disbelief washed over the crowd. Fans leaned forward, squinting at the giant scoreboard, checking the list twice. Phones already in hand were raised higher, cameras now focused not on the court in general, but on the tunnel from which she would emerge. A murmur spread through the stands, a collective, whispered question: "Wait, is she actually starting?" The moment the announcer confirmed it, the arena didn't just cheer, it exploded. It was a cathartic release, a roar of vindication from a public that felt it had been shouting into the void for months. Everyone in that building knew what this meant. For months, the basketball world had been conducting a thought experiment, a hypothetical debate about what would happen if Clark was finally given control from the very beginning. Not on a limited minutes restriction, not within cautious rotational patterns, not as part of a controlled experiment to manage chemistry, but with the full unequivocal green light. And now the experiment was no longer hypothetical. The moment had arrived. Across the court, the New Zealand players, the unwitting subjects of this grand experiment, huddled together. They listened to their coach's final instructions, a game plan that was probably sound on paper, a strategy built on the principles of fundamental basketball. They had no idea that they were about to become the first witnesses to a new reality. The ball went up, tip-off, and from the very first possession the atmosphere on the court shifted. It wasn't about athleticism or sheer force, it was about presence. Clark didn't rush, she didn't try to force a highlight reel play. Instead, she walked the ball up the floor with a calm that bordered on unnerving. It was the gait of a veteran point guard, a 10-year pro who had seen every defense, every trap, every scheme imaginable. But it was more than that. It was the walk of a maestro approaching the podium, the quiet before the symphony erupts. Her eyes were scanning, but not just looking. They were decoding. They were processing 1,000 microdata points in an instant. The positioning of the defender in front of her, the angle of her hips, the weight distribution on her feet. She saw the weak side defenders, their heads turned slightly toward the ball, their help side rotations a fraction of a second too slow. She cataloged the passing lanes, the slivers of open space on the floor that existed for only a blink before a defender would close them. The defense, sensing the danger, tightened. 2 sets of eyes immediately locked onto her. 2 defenders leaned in, ready to collapse. And that's when it happened. Clark took one hard, decisive dribble to her right. It was a small movement, a mere feint, but it was enough. The entire defense, like a school of fish reacting to a perceived threat, shifted with her. It was a conditioned response, a basic principle of help defense, react to the ball handler's movement. In that split second of collective shifting, a tiny, almost invisible seam opened up on the weak side. Clark didn't look there, she didn't need to. She had already seen it before the dribble even started. With a flick of her wrist, she fired a laser pass across the court, a perfectly thrown rope that zipped through the air, bypassing 2 defenders, and landed directly in the shooting pocket of her teammate who was spotting up in the corner. The catch was clean, the release was high. Splash, 3 points, 6 seconds into the game. The crowd erupted, a thunderclap of pure, unadulterated joy. But this was only the first note of the symphony. Over the next few minutes, something began to happen that completely upended the rhythm of the game. Clark wasn't just scoring, she was orchestrating chaos. She was controlling the tempo, dictating the terms of every single possession. Every offensive set flowed through her hands. Every defensive rotation by New Zealand was a reaction to her movement, a desperate attempt to patch a leak she had already identified. She would pull a defender out to the logo, 30 feet from the basket, completely blowing up the integrity of their half-court defense. Now there was a gaping hole in the middle of the key. She would drive into that space, forcing another defender to collapse, and then with a no-look pass that seemed to defy physics, she would kick the ball to a now wide-open shooter on the perimeter. The spacing she created was like a masterclass in geometry, manipulating the hardwood into shapes that favored her team. The scoreboard began to move with startling speed, 10-2, 16-4, 21-6. New Zealand called a timeout. Their players trudged to the bench, their faces a mixture of confusion and frustration. It wasn't for a lack of effort. They were competing, fighting through screens, contesting shots, but nothing they were doing was working. They were playing by the old rules and Clark was writing new ones in real time. Meanwhile, on the USA sideline, Clark walked calmly toward her teammates. There was no fist pumping, no dramatic screaming, no acknowledging the roaring crowd. Just a quiet, focused expression, a brief exchange with a coach, a sip of water. And that perhaps was the most terrifying part of all. She looked completely comfortable. This wasn't a fluke or a hot streak. This was simply how she played basketball. Back on the court, the avalanche continued. The New Zealand defense, now thoroughly demoralized, began to break down in spectacular fashion. On one possession, with the shot clock winding down, Clark found herself with the ball well beyond the 3-point line, a full 30 feet from the hoop. Her defender, playing her honestly, was a respectful 6 feet away, expecting a drive. Clark rose up, her form as pure as it had been in high school, in college, in a million driveways in Des Moines. The release was high, the arc was perfect, and the ball splashed through the net with a sound that was both violent and beautiful. Nothing but net from 30 feet, the arena exploded again. The defender, a talented athlete in her own right, didn't look at the rim, she didn't look at the bench for instruction, she just looked back at her coach with an expression of pure, helpless disbelief. How do you guard a shot like that? The honest, terrifying answer is that you don't. It's unguardable. And that's when the panic truly set in. The New Zealand coach, seeing his team being picked apart from deep, made an adjustment. He called for a double team. It was a logical move, stop the scorer at all costs, but against someone like Clark it was a fatal mistake. Because every time two defenders rushed toward her, sacrificing their positioning, someone else on the USA team became open. And Clark, with her preternatural vision, found them. Every single time. It wasn't just passing, it was a form of telepathy. She would thread a needle through traffic for a layup. She would whip a skip pass across the court for an open three. She would drop a perfect pocket pass to a rolling big for an easy dunk. One assist, then another, then another. The offense, which had looked stagnant and disjointed in previous games without a true floor general, was now a thing of beauty, a seamless, flowing machine. The commentary team, watching the masterclass unfold, couldn't contain their analysis. The conversation drifted to the broader philosophy of the game, using Clark's impact as a lens through which to view the sport's evolution. "We've got to shoot more three-pointers," one analyst exclaimed, watching the USA team occasionally settle for contested long twos when Clark was on the bench. "I was screaming about that during the last game. There are so many mid-range shots, these long twos, I personally don't like that. And maybe I've been watching too much NBA lately, but the game is evolving and women's basketball has to evolve along with it. It has to become quicker. It plays to our strengths. We play a more skill-based game than the men. We don't play as athletically, so why aren't we shooting more threes? It spaces the floor. It prevents the game from getting mucked up with everyone packed in the paint." He was right, the contrast was stark. With Clark on the floor was expansive, the ball moved, and the defense was perpetually on its heels. With her on the bench, the offense reverted to a more static, predictable style, allowing the defense to load up and clog the lanes. The difference wasn't just statistical, it was philosophical. Clark represented the future, a future where skill and spacing reigned supreme. And her time on the court was a vivid preview of what that future could look like. The scoreboard kept climbing, an inexorable march toward triple digits. By halftime, the game was already a formality, the competitive tension long since drained. But the real damage, the lasting psychological blow, was delivered in the third quarter. Because that's when Clark turned the game from a dominant win into something else entirely. Not just a victory, but a statement. She walked into another deep three, bang. The shot was so deep, so casual, that it drew gasps from the crowd even before it went in. On the next possession, she drove the lane, drew three defenders, and in a moment of pure improvisational genius, flipped a pass behind her back without looking. The ball found its way perfectly to a teammate cutting to the rim for an easy layup. The crowd was on its feet now, and they stayed there. Every time Clark touched the ball, a wave of anticipation swept through the arena. People stood up, leaning forward, expecting something crazy to happen. And most of the time, it did. By the time she finally checked out of the game for good, having played only 23 minutes, the damage was done. The final numbers, 14 points, 6 assists, only told a fraction of the story. The full story was in the total control she exerted, the way she bent the game to her will, and the final score glaring from the scoreboard, a 55-point victory for Team USA. The kind of score that isn't just a win, it's a message. It's the kind of number that makes people around the basketball world stop in their tracks, put down their coffee, and ask a fundamental question. This wasn't just a win over an overmatched opponent. It looked like the future of basketball being unveiled in real time. It was domination so complete, so artistic, that it transcended sport and entered the realm of spectacle. But the real story, the one that would linger long after the final buzzer, wasn't just the final score or the 23-minute masterpiece. It was what those 23 minutes represented. For the first time on the stage, with the world watching, the basketball public saw what happens when Caitlin Clark is fully unleashed. Not limited by cautious rotations, not restricted by a system designed for a different kind of player, not carefully managed to protect chemistry or egos. Just playing her game, and the result was something that made fans cheer with unbridled joy. But it also created something else. In the quiet moments after the game, in the press conferences where coaches offered platitudes and players spoke of team effort, there was a palpable undercurrent of something else. Because when one player has the ability to completely reshape the flow of a game, to make a professional team look helpless, to command the attention of everyone in a 20,000-seat arena, they also possess the power to reshape the future of the entire sport. The economics will change. The media rights will change, the marketing campaigns will change, the center of gravity will shift. For some, this is a dream. For others, it is a threat. It's a threat to the old hierarchies, to the established order, to the comfortable narratives that have persisted for years. It creates a nervous tension, a political undercurrent that will play out in locker rooms and league offices and on social media for years to come. The question is no longer whether Caitlin Clark can play at this level. That question has been answered with emphatic 30-foot finality. The new question, the one that will define the next era of women's basketball, is more complex. Can the sport, with all its existing structures and personalities, adapt to orbit around a new sun? After this performance, one thing became very, very clear. The era of Caitlin Clark isn't coming, it's here. And if this is what she can do in only 23 minutes of a meaningless exhibition game, with a team she's barely practiced with, imagine what happens next. Imagine the nights when the game is on the line, the playoffs are on the horizon, and the ball is in her hands with the final shot. Imagine a league built around her gravity, with spacing that unlocks the potential of every player on the floor. Imagine the viewership numbers, the sponsorship deals, the cultural footprint. That night in the arena, the crowd witnessed a performance, but what they really saw was the opening scene of a new chapter, a prologue to a story whose ending has yet to be written. The only certainty is that Caitlin Clark, with a basketball in her hands, is now holding the pen, and after a night like that, it's hard to imagine her giving it back. The nervous conversations in quiet offices will continue, the political maneuvering will persist. But on the court where the game is actually played, the power has already shifted. The lever has been pulled and there is no going back.